Well, welcome to another edition of Unlocked. Today, I'm delighted to announce we have as our very special guest, Claudia Webbe, the Member of Parliament for the Labour Party for Leicester East. Now, Claudia is very much seen as a rising star of the Labour Party, a former policy advisor to London Mayor Ken Livingstone, was then a councillor in Islington before she returned to her home city of Leicester when she was elected in December 2019. During an impassioned and emotional maiden speech, Claudia spoke very emotionally of the garment industry in Leicester, how her mother had worked in that, and highlighted a hot topic issue that we covered on the last edition of Unlocked, and that is the illegal slave trade in Leicester. So, Claudia, thanks for coming on the show. If I could, I'd like to directly get you to respond to a couple of comments made by Andrew Bridgen, the Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire, who told us on Unlocked that he'd been approached by whistleblowers from the city of Leicester, including from inside your seat. And he claimed that there are up to 10,000 illegal slave workers in the garment industry across the city of Leicester. He called this Leicester's dirty secret and the cancer at the heart of our society. What would you say to that?
Well, of course, those words that you describe are quite sensationalist, in my view, and to the extreme to say that it amounts to 10,000 people. There's certainly, on average, 10,000 people working in Leicester's garment industry. And of course, the time that my mother, who's a home worker, very skilled dressmaker, was working in that industry, she was always told me, and I always grew up in Leicester with the notion that we make clothes to last. And that is the industry that my mother worked in at the time. It was a very proud industry for Leicester. Leicester was almost the symbol of a proud garment industry at one point. And what we've had over successive years is the deindustrialization and the rolling back of our manufacturing base until it gets to a situation where you've got parts of Leicester's garment industry left wanting in terms of worker exploitation. And in a sense, what you've got is that level of malpractice going on in too many parts of Leicester's once proud garment industry. And that is because not least because of what we've seen over the past 10 years of austerity. It is central government who have the power to investigate workplaces and enforce protections. The government has long known and been aware of exploitation in Leicester garment industry and indeed across the UK. And in a sense, this was highlighted in many reports that have come forward. We had in 2019, the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee report made a number of recommendations, and also the 2017 Human Rights and Business report that examined again this issue and highlighted the problems in Leicester's garment industry. And the government actually rejected every single recommendation that came out of those reports. And I think that is scandalous in itself, that rejection is seen and writ large on the Parliament's website. Every single recommendation rejected. And it's indeed shameful that the Conservative government has indeed neglected to act despite widespread and long-standing evidence of gross employer misconduct. The government have also, of course, slashed the budget of the Health and Safety Executive, the body responsible for investigating workplace malpractice. So we had in 2010 a budget of 100 million. By today, they've got they've had that slashed by 100 million since 2010. So that's 46% of the health and safety executive's budget slashed since 2010, and that again is scandalous. The truth is that Andrew is part of a Conservative government that or party that actually prioritises tax cuts rather than and tax cuts to the ultra rich, of course, rather than enforcing workplace protections. And that's the truth of it. And what we need is change in terms of the government taking this issue seriously, implementing the recommendations that are before it. And we obviously have to keep up the pressure from the media, as they have done since 2010. Channel 4 Zone Reporter, for example, did a report in 2010. In 2015, Channel 4 Dispatches returned to the issue. We've also had the University of Leicester also investigate this issue. And so there's been successive investigations upon investigations and serious recommendations made, which the government have rejected every single time. Okay, and it's about time we work to protect workers.
I'd like to pick you up on a couple of points there. So the 2019 report you referred to, there were 18 recommendations made in that, but only 3 of them were about slavery and workers' conditions. A lot of them were about things like tax changes, VAT, and imposing more restrictions on the industry, which I think a lot of business people felt could actually harm the industry by driving jobs abroad. I mean, we live in a global world. And indeed, the specific recommendation 3 about workers' conditions, the government actually did increase officers enforcing the national living wage from 140 to 424, and they doubled the budget from 13 to 26 million. So they did do something.
No,
it's a common misjudgment, I think, to say that every single recommendation was rejected. That's not the case.
It's you may want to try to defend the government when the government itself accepts that it rejected every single recommendation. It is on the record that all the recommendations have been rejected, which is why, as part of the Environmental Audit Committee, the chair himself, the Conservative chair himself, has written to the government again to now accept these recommendations. And I'm part of that Environment Audit Committee. And equally, there is the 2017 Human Rights Committee, which also came out, a joint Human Rights Committee. And these select committees are committees made up of parliamentarians from all parties. So this is not something that can be denied or defended. The government absolutely rejected every single recommendation. And we're talking here about worker exploitation. Yeah. And the reality is that means that when they've cut, for example, the budget also of Her Majesty's Revenue's inspectors, it means that you can't really have the resources also to ensure that the employers are applying the correct processes when it comes to the enforcing the minimum wage. So the reality is, it's not about whether the minimum wage increases. We are talking about fraudulent activities going on with regards to people's pay, where people are working 55 hours or more and yet only receiving the pay of somebody working 20 hours. This is wrong and must be stopped. And the government must take action to stop it. This is not something that is happening alone in Leicester. This is something that is happening across the UK, and it's also a reflection of what happens globally too. The government has a responsibility to take these issues seriously, and therefore it must act. And there is widespread agreement that the government must act so as to protect the workers who are exploited, not just in Leicester, but across the UK too.
So do you think that the answer should be, because this has become undeniably a political football, I mean, the Conservatives say that the Labour councils don't take enough action, the Labour Party are blaming central government, and we don't seem to ever really get anywhere, do we? What do you think the answer could be? I mean, is it more powers, for example, for local councils?
Well, I mean, the truth is the government has starved local authorities of funding over the last 10 years. In Leicester alone, central government grant funding has been cut from 289 million in 2010 to just 171 million today. This means essentially frontline services, including workplace safety monitoring, suffer as a result. Trade unions are the best line of defence against employee exploitation. Yet, over the last decade, trade unions have been under siege from the Conservatives, most notably, of course, with the appalling 2016 Trade Union Act. The government must prove, in my view, that it prioritised public health over profit by beginning to take workers' rights seriously and therefore beginning to give priority to trade unions and the role that they can play. Many of the most vulnerable workers in Leicester are migrant workers, in some cases undocumented, migrant workers, or individuals with no recourse to public funds. That means that they are legally here in the UK, but they can work, but they cannot claim benefits, and they're on no recourse to public funds. So what happens in a pandemic? It means that they have no choice but to work through callous, hostile environment policies and the Windrush scandal. The government has failed, as we know, to protect those at-risk individuals. So you have clear British citizens who have fallen through the net of this hostile environment policy. They have no choice but to work, even though they are British citizens, and even though they were here long before the Labour Party introduced the minimum wage level. So people are coming to me who have worked in the industry since 1992, for example, or even since the 1980s. And instead of their wages increasing, they're being driven down because of the situation that they find themselves, because of the hostile approach of this government. And I wrote, I'll say this, I wrote to the Prime Minister with a 5-point plan to seriously address this issue, including raising and enforcing minimum wage, working with trade unions to protect workers' rights, increasing the powers and funding of local authorities to intervene in unsafe workplaces, strengthening the Modern Slavery Act, and a bespoke programme of support for Leicester as a whole, and actually ensuring and enabling workers' voices are heard by enabling people to come forward in the first place and not be frightened off. I am yet to receive any kind of response from the Prime Minister on this.
I'd like to raise a point specifically about unions. You wrote yesterday to Boris Johnson a letter co-signed, undersigned by Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott, and many of the leading lights, and Caroline Lucas, of course, asking for more union power. Now, when we did the last edition of Unlocked, we had Paresh Patel on. He's the Regional Secretary of Unite East Midlands. And I specifically put the point to him. What we're talking about here isn't a regular working practice where unions can go in and demand workers' rights. This is illegal factories that are paying way below the minimum wage, where people are being grossly exploited in the hearts of their own communities. These people don't even declare tax, they pay cash. This is a backstreet slave economy. How can unions work in the black market? It's an illegal business. They don't want the unions involved. They want to disappear. They want to be invisible. Why would they invite the unions?
You're going to the extremes again. The reality is that there are workers' voices.
That's what dispatchers said.
No, you're going to the extremes again. The reality is that there are workers' voices that need to be heard, workers' rights that need to be protected. Workers need to be able to turn to a union base. It is not right that their last resort is to come to me, albeit I am their member of parliament, of course. But this shouldn't be their last resort. They should be able to go into a workplace and and be able to join a union without fear. Now, the reality is that the whole of this industry, whether or not they are exploitative or not in terms of as employers, the whole of this industry is largely ununionized. And instead of rolling back the union powers, what the government needs to do is repeal the 2016 Trade Union Act and empower workplaces to encourage unionization. Because by doing that, you set in trend a cultural change that makes it okay for workers to speak up about the injustices that they are facing, or makes it okay for workers to question the salary that they are receiving, or makes it okay for workers to say, could I have some holiday pay, please, and could I have some time off as well? And it should be okay for workers to do all of these things without being threatened with the sack for doing so. And that is the culture that is in place. You may not have employers who are going to the extremes of the conditions that you're talking about, but you may also have employers who are simply not delivering proper wages, who are delivering 0-hour contracts, which this government promotes and needs to end. And this is, 0-hour contracts is not illegal, but it's wrong. And therefore, workers need the right to be able to challenge when they are on 0-hour contracts for far too long.
But what I'm hearing from you here, Claudia, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have illegal working practice with often, or at least certainly, sometimes illegal undocumented workers who are being treated appallingly. And your solution is to give clemency to those working illegally and to legitimize slave labor businesses. That can't be right.
Anybody that's listening to this interview will know that that's not what I said. These are your words, not my words. I have made clear that I've set out to the Prime Minister a 5-point plan for action. I've also made clear that that there are at least 2 parliamentary reports with very clear and serious set of recommendations. All 18 recommendations, in fact, of the Environmental Audit Committee report are required to end what is happening in parts of Leicester's garment industry and in the garment industry across the UK, and that is what is needed. So it's not right to say that I'm simply asking for. What I'm saying is it doesn't help when you don't have rights for workers and when you don't have a voice for workers, and you need to enable workers to raise their voices, because it's important to have the evidence firsthand. I have received much evidence firsthand because I'm talking about people who are constituents of Leicester East, and they have come to me and given me firsthand information. That isn't right, that they have no other place to share that information or to have the right to challenge their employer. Every workplace should have the right for their workers to be able to challenge the working conditions, including pay, of what they're experiencing. And if they want to challenge 0-hour contracts, having worked for a garment manufacturer for 4 years, then they should have the right to do so, even if that they're being paid the minimum wage on that. But the conditions on which they are operating need to be challenged, and that's simply requires a negotiation. The best negotiators are the unions, and they should be given the power to engage in workplaces. The workplace, of course, in terms of the garment industry, is not the standard that people across the country might expect. We've got workplaces and factories that are sometimes located in what seems like a terraced house on a local street, employing as little as 10 or 8 people, to workplaces which are employing 50 plus people. So we're talking about an industry that is 1,500 deep in Leicester, 1,500 individual factories across Leicester, significant number in my constituency of Leicester East, but across Leicester nonetheless. And we're talking about, therefore, an industry that needs regulating, and that's just Leicester alone, never mind London or Manchester or elsewhere, where people are faced with the same issues.
Isn't the truth of the matter here, I mean, I'm sure you're frustrated, the Conservatives also say that they're frustrated, because the bottom line is not enough is being done, is it? I mean, and surely if you're contacted by constituents who blow the whistle because they're working in places that are unfair or maybe even illegal, surely it's your responsibility, it's society's responsibility to close these sweatshops down.
Well, my actions since day one, when I was elected the Member of Parliament, which is only a short 6 months, has been to bring about the change, which is why the first opportunity that I had to raise the matter, the first opportunity that I had to speak in the Houses of Commons, was to raise this issue in very clear terms, that this is an industry that has gone that is not progressing well at all, and therefore needs reform. And so it is not right that workers are paid as little as £3 an hour. It's not right that employers seek to hide detection by making out that their factories are shut and whilst filing workers through the back door, and workers having to operate with little light and no bathroom facility to speak of. And some of these conditions are appalling, and therefore it's ultimately, however, the role of government, which has the power to intervene and act to protect vulnerable workers in Leicester. And as a Leicester East MP, I can lobby, of course, the government and give a voice to my constituents. And that is what I have been tirelessly doing. This week, I coordinated a joint letter, which you've highlighted, signed by 40 parliamentarians. It is not the first letter that I have put to government. I have sent previous letters to the Prime Minister, as I've already indicated, listing manufacturers that have been brought to my attention and given directly to the Prime Minister himself. But this joint letter, signed by 40 parliamentarians representing 7 political parties, urging the government to end workplace exploitation in Leicester, is the latest of that. When I was elected, ending workplace exploitation was and remains one of my strongest priorities. And I know that this has been going on clearly for some time, and I have ensured to mention the exploitation of workers, as we've heard in my maiden speech, which was, as I've indicated, my first opportunity to do so in the House. I also wrote to the Business Secretary in March 2020 to raise concerns regarding unsafe working conditions in Leicester, in my constituency, and in terms of across Leicester, where members of residents of Leicester East were travelling to work, to which I received an inadequate stop response from a government minister. I mean, this matter is really not being taken seriously. If I write to the Business Secretary, I don't expect a response from a minister. I expect the Business Secretary to take this matter seriously. Government has the power, and they must act and fund properly the organisations that that can bring about a change. The recommendations talk about, for example, a single enforcement agency that can better drill down on some of these issues. The recommendations talk about an ethical standard for businesses to sign up to. There's a whole range of things that can be done to enhance and develop this industry back to its once proud place without destroying Leicester's garment industry and destroying the skills that workers bring to this this profession.
I've got one final point to put to you, and that is there's been quite a lot in the media, and indeed we spoke to a garment factory owner called Mick Chima, who works in Leicester. He's one of the good guys. He plays by the system. He pays well. He sees his margins undercut. He wants this exploitation of slavery to end because, as you quite rightly say, it's damaging those who play by the game. But here's another point. Do you think that the media are right to focus on the fact that this issue has been swept under the carpet for a long time because of cultural sensitivities? These are largely Asian people being exploited by Asian slave masters. Let's be blunt, this is slavery. We can call it worker exploitation, but it's illegal and they're grossly underpaid and they were made to work through the COVID-19 crisis. So has that fear of being called racist meant that this has remained a secret in Leicester for too long?
This is, it's nonsense, really. There is nothing about cultural sensitivity that is certainly preventing me from acting. There was nothing about cultural sensitivity that prevented the government from introducing the hostile environment. There was nothing about cultural sensitivity that means that African, Asian, minority ethnic communities are disadvantaged and discriminated at every step in the workplace. Nobody is crying out cultural sensitivity and treading safely when it comes to these issues. It's an outrageous attempt, really, to divide communities which have been under significant strain due to the extended lockdown, actually. The exploitation of workers is a global issue which transcends ethnicity, and everyone knows that. So there are countless exploitative companies run by white individuals such as Sports Direct, which have recently been accused of paying workers under the minimum wage. This is no different in that respect. This is a shameless, therefore, damaging attempt to deflect from the government's failure, if you like, to protect workers across Leicester. Leicester's diversity is our strength, and we must reject, therefore, the government's divide and rule tactics, which are centuries long and really a legacy of empire and the brutal empire that it was. So we won't take any notion of divide and rule tactics in this regard.
Okay.
And I think that therefore we must absolutely stay focused on the issue of worker exploitation and the misery that it brings to too many workers. And we must remember to focus that on the reality that there has been only one party in power for a decade, and one party which has ignored repeated evidence and recommendations to act on this issue. That is the Conservative Party. So this isn't about a knockabout on that front. It is about simply stating the facts. The government has the power. It must act. And I will keep pushing and I will keep demanding change. Nothing is going to stop me. No one is going to frighten me from doing so. And I will ensure that the voices of the voiceless, the voices of workers across Leicester, and in particular in my constituency of Leicester East, are indeed heard. I'm determined to end this now. And together and jointly with others across Parliament and with others across civil society, I believe we can do this and we can restore the good reputation that Leicester once had as the jewel in the garment industry, as the once proud Leicester's garment industry, the once proud industry that my mother worked for. And certainly if she was alive today, she would be ashamed to call this an industry that she was ever a part of. We need to return to making clothes that last rather than making clothes for fast fashion.
Claudia Webbe, MP for Leicester East, thank you for your gracious time today. You're certainly a very passionate woman and keep fighting for your constituents, but thanks for coming on Unlocked, and I hope to see you again on the show. Hey, what about if we actually sat down with some Conservatives and tried to have a more comprehensive and progressive conversation? Would you be up for that?
I'm sure. Well, as I said, I sit alongside other party parliamentarians all the time in these select committees. We've called, as I said, for the Environmental Audit Committee to reopen this whole inquiry and to look again at the recommendations. And I sit alongside with Conservative parliamentarians and other parliamentarians on that. And I'm sure we'll have the debate there. But everybody is together as one in wanting to see this end of this worker exploitation and the end of these abuses of workers' human rights. So I'm sure we can have many discussions about this. This is a non-contentious issue, actually, and so it should be something that we can all come together jointly on and have a reasonable discussion as to how to end this exploitation, not just in Leicester but across the UK, and in equally to understand the global impact that this has on workers across the world as well.
Great. Claudia Webbe, thank you for appearing on Unlocked, and have a great day.
Thank you.